Hello, I'm Dr. Randy Bach. Today's July 16, 2024. I'm honored to have with me Dr. Stanley Ridgley, professor I'm going to not get this right, of management at Drexel University, but he can perhaps specify a little bit. And he's the author of an incredible book. It's a great read and a difficult read at the same time. It's not difficult to read it. It's difficult to think on it and so forth. It's called Brutal Minds. And I recommend that all the minds out there, brutal or not, take this book up and learn from its applications and instructions. Stan, tell us a little bit about yourself, your book, how you came to it, and what's going on in the university, and why are you still at one?
Well, thanks a lot, Randy. It's a pleasure to be on your show. I'm a clinical full professor of management at Drexel University, and this book is my third book, actually, and it is, I think, my most important book in the sense that it really mines the rich vein of indoctrination and a lot of the problems that we see on the university campuses that have emerged onto the streets of our society. And it really cuts to the heart of the source of a lot of the problems that we see around us. And I also provide remedies. I provide guidance for parents, for college students, for the short-term fix on the college campuses, the venue of where much of the brainwash and these thought reform programs occur, but also recommendations for the longer-term fix for the university. We don't need to pursue both, one or the other. We need to pursue both at the same time, both long-term and short-term fixes for the university. The problems are serious. The problems I identify in Brutal Minds are endemic to the university, regardless of where it is, to a more greater or lesser extent. Rare is it that the university that you're at doesn't have some aspect of the thought reform program that is in operation on most university campuses. In the book, I explain why I can make what may seem like an unfair generalization, that it is the same folks, the same type of folks, the same folks on the campuses in the similar positions are pursuing the same ideological agenda. No, it's quite a fair justification. It's quite a fair assessment. And I quote from these folks. 80% of the book is actual quotations, actual citations from the folks who are perpetuating this abuse of our college students. And it is really a tragedy that we can fix if we focus our attention on who the culprits are, what they're doing, and how they're doing it.
It may shock people. I went to college, and I actually graduated. I enjoyed it. It was a wonderful experience. To that point, the highlight experience of my lifetime. Since then, marriage, kids, working, career, experience, whatever, a little bit pales or maybe fades in memory. And I was a kind of a mathy science kind of guy, and I graduated with a BS in chemistry and physics from Yale. And I avoided perhaps some of the Herbert Marcuse, kind of neo-Marxian stuff. I remember seeing people in the library, the kind of the almost like penthouse letters, the girl in the cashmere sweater with pearls, pencil in mouth, pondering over all these books. And I wondered who they were and what it was about, but so forth. Anyway, I had no real idea kind of cultural rot that was there, but I don't think it was as much of a thing. We had seminars, we had discussions, we had conversations in the basically in the hallways and in the dining halls and all that kind of stuff, and things were pretty open about discussion. Something happened in the universities, and I'd like you to discuss what happened structurally that has brought about kind of it's not to say there weren't leftists on campus. There were. I think the prevailing, obviously in the 60s, there were riots. In the 70s, there were, demonstrations, all that kind of stuff. So the SDS was on campus, way before my time. And we had Sloan Coffin, at Yale and whatever. So there was all the anti-war protests. It's not like there wasn't leftism on campus. But something changed within the universities. Maybe you can kind of get at the root cause of this and how, speaking of roots, how these roots have kind of grown.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to address that. And one of the primary frustrations that I've had in writing this book and talking with a lot of parents, talking with a lot of faculty, is there are a group of folks who are on our side, allies, well-meaning folks who say this is nothing new. This is something we've always had to contend with on the college campuses. As you relate, there have always been leftists who are very influential on the college campuses, outnumbering conservatives, certainly. And that, of course, has grown more lopsided. And to the extent where faculty, I think that the liberal to conservative ratio is 6-to-1 right now. And that's not what my book is about. Okay, it's we've always had to deal with that. You know, you've got the rascally, nutty professor. You've got the frustrated, aging radical who has no problem utilizing his classroom as a bully pulpit for his personal political.
Emphasis on the word bully.
Yeah, bully pulpit for his personal political, tirades. They're all over the place. I've seen this. I've seen students have sent me Zoom recordings of English professors who've decided they want to be political scientists, commenting on the issues of the day, which they're not really paid to do when you think about that, and they're really talking out of school, out of their bailiwick. Well, this is not what I'm talking about. Okay, that's understood. What is new, really new in the last 20-25 years, in the 21st century, actually, is the influence of the neo-Marxist influence of education schools. Education schools have always been the bottom feeders of higher education, the least respected of our various disciplines. Okay, that's just a fact. And I'm not going to go into why that happens to be. I do that in the book. But education schools decided, the people in the education schools decided, how can we increase our influence, ideological influence over the entire university? That would be a good thing for us. And so what they began to do in the early part of this century is to create graduate programs to train bureaucrats. This is in the education school. The bureaucrat degrees that they offer are both masters, which is really the prevalent problem here, master's degrees in higher education, along with PhDs, EDDs. PhDs are not quite as bad. They're actually research focused, but EDDs, the doctorate education, kind of a Jill Biden.
Don't we have one in the White House right now?
Yes, we do. Dr. Jill Biden. I mean, it's actually, well, I'm not going to go into that. Okay. Let's just say that she insists on being called doctor. And there's really no one on the college campus who would actually call someone like that a doctor. And the only people who really insist on being called doctor are actual doctors like yourself and EDDs. They're the ones who, I worked so hard to get this appellation and these letters behind my name. You need to call me doctor. Now, I don't insist on that. I'm a professor. Okay. The only actual doctors in practice are medical doctors, and they deserve that appellation. But not those of us in academia who, we don't want to have that. I don't want to have that misreading that I'm some kind of physician when I'm actually not. But Jill Biden has no problem with that sort of thing. Well, the education schools decided to create these degrees. It's called student affairs administration, higher education administration, educational leadership is one of those degrees. And they began giving these advanced degrees to, it's almost as if you have a pulse, you can get into the program. And they've been we're graduating these folks, and then these folks were moving back into the university, not really through the front door, having to go through a rigorous hiring process as all faculty might, but no, they're coming in the side door of hiring in the circle of friends in the bureaucracy, in student affairs. Interject here that there are two major units on the college campus. There's academic affairs, which is where I prosper, and then there's student affairs, which are the ancillary support staff of advising and clerks and enrollment managers and that sort of thing. Student life, that kind of extracurriculars. Well, the bureaucrats are nestled in that student affairs quasi-academic unit, and they desperately want to be treated as if they're faculty. So they call themselves college educators. They call us, faculty, college educators. Now you see the verbal slight here. They're trying to put us both in the same big bucket. big bucket where we're all just college educators doing our thing. And they've actually created a co-curriculum, which is a fake curriculum with fake courses and fake transcripts, fake instructors, that is designed to offer this parallel enterprise, parallel to the actual curriculum. And it is here in this co-curriculum where the student affairs folks thrive. I mentioned the liberal to conservative ratio of faculty, liberal to conservative 6-to-1. In the bureaucracy, especially the student affairs bureaucracy, that ratio is 12-to-1. 12-to-1 leftist domination. Those statistics come from the research of Samuel Abrams at Sarah Lawrence College. It appeared in the Wall Street Journal just 2 years ago. This is his latest research on the topic, that while there is a liberal permeation on the college campus by virtue of the faculty, this outside the classroom, where students are messaged 24/7 if they happen to live on the college classroom, on the college campus, is ubiquitous. It's inescapable. And this is in their literature. And when I say their literature, I'm referring to student affairs, fake academic journals. They're really cargo cult type of journals offering advice on how to transmit the message of social justice on campus, and then offering after action reports on how well we succeeded in transmitting this message of social justice. This is not what academia is about. This is not what scholarship is actually about, the generation of new knowledge. Here's one of their manuals right here. Let's put this so you can see this. Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. I'll even name their names. Marianne Adams, Leanne Bell, and Pat Griffin right here. This is a book. This is the 1997 edition. It's come out in 4 editions since this initial publication. The latest edition came out in last fall. I own all 4 editions. I like to monitor the change in language, the change in terminology. The actual content, substantive content, never changes, ever. The language, the vernacular is adjusted periodically. Okay, now this is the most damning, the 1997 version, in which they actually reference the creator of the brainwash, which is a social psychologist from MIT in the 1940s by the name of Dr. Kurt Lewin. And this schema that he developed, and he is the guy who, if you ever wondered who coined the term reeducation, it's Kurt Lewin. He's the guy who coined that. Now, he also is known as the father of the encounter group, or the T group, training group, where we would, and this is him talking, we would address the maladies in society. We would address the pathologies in society, not just racism, but criminality. And we can do this by changing someone's belief system. And we will do this through a 3-stage process. We will attack that individual's belief system, right? We will unfreeze it. And then we will change that belief system to something we believe is more suitable for societal norms. And then we will cement that or refreeze that belief system in our target, so that there's no backsliding, so there's no recidivism into a life of crime, and that sort of thing. Well, this 3-stage model has evolved over time. It's always 3 stages, though. It's always underneath whatever permutation of the vernacular we find. There's always this 3-stage model where you attack, in this case, the college student's belief system. You unfreeze it, you destabilize it. And where is this actually taught? Well, I have a book right here. It's called Designing Transformative Multicultural Initiatives by Dr. Sherry K. Watt, University of Iowa. She actually says we're trying to destabilize our target students' belief system. She says this. This is not something that is, deduced from the text. She says we're going to destabilize a student's belief system by providing them a dissonant stimulus situation or incident, or a dissonant creating stimulus to do that. And then we're going to insert or reestablish or create for the student a new reality. Now, this 3-stage process that I'm talking about is detailed elaborately in this book right here, where it tells you we're going to one of the things they do is we're going to obtain the student's trust. It's absolutely essential that the thought reformers that do this, the faculty members who do this, and whether it's in the School of Social Work, whether it's in the School of Education, whether it's a part of the co-curriculum in a fake course, what they absolutely have to do is obtain the student's trust. And they go to great lengths to do this, to say, and they say things like this, and they actually have cliches that they utter that they know are very effective. They say, well, we want you to make yourself vulnerable and make you feel free to self-disclose your deepest thoughts. Let me model some vulnerability for you. Now I'm a facilitator doing this. I'm a facilitator. You can trust me. Let me model some self-disclosure, and then I'll reveal something that's nondescript or meaningless. Trying to get a response from the student that will reveal something about that student's personal life, about his family, about his culture, society, how he was brought up, that sort of thing, which will then make him indeed vulnerable for the next stage, which is the changing of the belief system, replacing it with one that's grounded in critical consciousness, which is a neo-Marxist term that was, I'll say, coined by a Brazilian neo-Marxist by the name of Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire, who is the closest thing you find to sainthood of any writer in schools of education. Paulo Freire, is in the pantheon of great writers who influenced Marxists like bell hooks, Ira Shore, Henry Giroux, Michael Apple, Zeus Leonardo. These are all self-professed, self-proclaimed Marxists. They make no bones about it. They don't apologize for it. They're very upfront about it, but they don't actually come out on their Twitter accounts and say this. No, they say this in their journal articles and in their books, over 200 of which I have reviewed, and well over 1,000 of their articles. And I'm being concerned. That's a conservative estimate, given that I've been worked on this book for 6 years. My wife does not understand how I can immerse myself in this type of what I consider intellectual garbage for any length of time. But I think it's absolutely necessary to mine this vein of pseudo-intellectual balderdash to find out why they believe what they believe, and why they believe that this is somehow gives them access to hidden knowledge. It privileges them, and then they can label you and me being afflicted with what they call false consciousness, which is straight out of Marx and Engels. That you and I, Randy, because we believe what we believe, we are inflicted with false consciousness. And they being the neo-Marxists in the education schools, the Freireans, are going to fix that. And they're going to fix that by putting us and college students on a conveyor belt from false consciousness to what they call critical consciousness. Now, critical consciousness is simply a state where you'll eventually agree with what they're telling you. It allows you to peer into the contradictions of society, to peer into and understand the relationships of power and privilege, oppression. It's a binary Manichaean philosophy where you have villains and victims, where you have oppressors and oppressed, exploiters and exploited. And you fall into one of those two categories, irrespective of any personal history, irrespective of any great swaths of history, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of how you treat people on an individual basis. And this is the nasty part of the critical consciousness / new belief system that they install in college as college students. And then they attempt to refreeze it. When I say refreeze it, this book right here, along with a number of others, tells you, hey, what we want to do is engage the student in activities, social justice activities, doing the work. Now, if you ever hear this horrible phrase, it's this awkward phrase, doing the work of anti-racism, doing the work of social justice. This means that they're trying to occupy the student in activities that will reinforce the new belief system. And they say, quite frankly, that students will feel a sense of betrayal by those who were supposed to tell them the truth about the social world, betrayal by parents, by friends, by respected mentors, by clergy in the church, by perhaps a high school mentor who refused to or did not inform them about this hidden knowledge. And I will say, Randy, I can pause here if you'd like me to, but I'm kind of on my high horse right now.
No, carry on.
Well, I was going to say, well, what is it? What is it? And I think it's a fair question. What is it that imbues this type of person in the school of education, which is where this is usually centered? It also has an off-campus nonprofit node of power. What is it that could possibly imbue these people with the notion that they have access to hidden knowledge, that they have special access to knowledge? Thomas Sowell wrote a book about this. It's one of his more neglected books, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. I'm reviewing it again right now. I wrote it in 1995. He calls it The Vision of the Anointed. The idea that these people have special access to a world that is closed to the rest of us. It's really all it is the manifestation, 21st century manifestation of Plato's cave. Most of us understand or know about Plato's cave in the Republic, in the discussion between Socrates and Glaucon, where we are really all prisoners in a cave, chained to our benches, and all we can perceive are the shadows on the cave wall in front of us that are cast by people who we can't see, and a fire behind us who have puppets and who are doing little dances, and all we can see are these shadows, and we try to interpret them, and that's reality. Well, according to Plato, what would happen if one person managed to break free, climb up out of the cave, and once his eyes became used to the bright light, he would understand that he and those of his like-minded brethren trapped in the cave are really prisoners of a false reality. They have, well, to put it in today's parlance, false consciousness. And he now is privy to critical consciousness. This is really just Plato's cave. And Alfred North Whitehead, the great philosopher, said all of philosophy is really just a series of footnotes to Plato when you get right down to it. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But in this case, it's certainly right. And so this worthy who is now privy to this knowledge goes back down into the cave and tries to convince his fellows that there's a whole bright new world outside. If you use today's parlance, critical consciousness. And this is what gives these people this attitude, I would say this bombast, that they are somehow privy to this knowledge. And when this knowledge is really not empirically based, it does not stand up to scientific rigor or scientific investigation. Karl Popper, the great philosopher of science, gave the lie to Marxism a long time ago and labeled it as pseudoscience because it has none of the characteristics of an actual science or a real scientific theory. I know he had some good things to say about economics. Okay, we can acknowledge that without accepting the whole shebang of balderdash that Marx and Engels were involved with. Well, Paulo Freire is the latest edition of this Marxist pantheon, and so you have to ask, why did they choose, they being the education people, why did they choose Paulo Freire as their mascot, as the guy with all of the hidden knowledge that they've now privy to? Well, they couldn't use the M word. Marx, Mao, and Marcuse, the three M words that are off limits. You can't use those words even today. You have to find some way to launder your dirty theory so that it's acceptable to an American audience. Just like Al Capone had to find a laundryman to launder his dirty money to clean it up. Well, they looked and they found a third world Brazilian Marxist, gray beard, visage, as a very sympathetic third world philosopher, educationist, who had basically endorsed, he became a Maoist in the 1960s when he was in exile from Brazil. And he endorsed this. He said it in his writings. It's not one of those things that's actually hidden or someone has to interpret. He had a great love of Lenin and of Stalin and of Fidel. And he had this great love, and I will say this, I say this with no not without any kind of reservation, a great love of Mao Zedong, the architect of the Cultural Revolution. Paulo Freire admired the Cultural Revolution of Mao Zedong, and he knew this, and he said this in 74, 8 years into Mao's revolution, all the depredations and the murder and the torture and the dislocation of millions of people and the death of anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million people in China at the time. And Freire said this. He said that while Lenin and Stalin had to shoot down the peasants, put a bullet in the back of their head, that Fidel is considering the idea, Mao came up with the most genial solution of the century, and that was the Cultural Revolution. And that's what Paulo Freire said in 1974 in a famous article called Consciência Social, which is the Brazilian word for critical consciousness. And this is what education schools are grounding their entire educational theory for us on, this Brazilian neo-Marxist. And one of the secondary, I think it's just kind of fun to recognize this, Randy, is that one of the things that makes critical theory or critical consciousness, and make no mistake, Paulo Freire was a disciple of critical theory, the Frankfurt School of neo-Marxists, which was created back in the 1920s, fled here to the United States, was at Columbia University for a time, which kind of ties in with what we're seeing today. That we're talking about Adorno and Horkheimer and Erich Fromm and Walter Benjamin, on even to Jürgen Habermas.
Is that Gramsci also?
Gramsci was the head of the Italian Communist Party. He was in prison in Italy, imprisoned by Mussolini and died in prison, and he smuggled out his prison. Now, I will say that Gramsci has a great contribution to the Marxist theory, and that's the idea of hegemony. And I think the Frankfurt theorists adopted hegemony as one of their chief concepts. It's kind of a conceptual notion that influenced the idea that capitalism is had achieved hegemony by dominating the dialogue, dominating the vernacular, blinding you, Randy, blinding me, and helping us in our reinforcement of false consciousness.
Yeah.
So Gramsci was a peripheral member. He was not able to be a part of it because he was in prison, of course.
I'm going to interject one thought. As far as we've been talking a lot about Marx, and we've neglected, this is Karl Marx, we've neglected Groucho Marx, who actually touches on false consciousness. At one point, he's talking to, I think, Margaret Dumont, and she sees something, and he's like, "What are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?" I don't know if you remember that quote. But essentially, that is kind of the essence of false consciousness.
Yes, it is.
You should believe me, in this case, a Marx. So it'd be Marxian theory or Marxian dialectic, but Groucho. You should believe me, not your lying eyes, because your eyes, the things you see and feel and touch, those are lies, not me, of course.
Yeah, it's kind of an inversion of the sensory, what we've always grounded the scientific revolution in, the idea of empirical testing, the idea that we can apprehend the world around us, and they want you to forget that, and they want you to believe in theory. They're in love with theory and what theory can do for us. And let me give you a quick example. I get back to the lies of critical theory. I read an article, and I have it off to one side, and I will eventually adopt it and use it in one of my books, of a LA, I guess you would call it the LA pundit, wrote a column about what to do about the Trumpites next door. And it turns out the article was about this person who had visited their alpine ski resort, and they have a place there. And it turns out that the folks next door did a very good job of plowing the snow out of their driveway, which is a very significant job. And they did a great job. And this presented the columnist with a conundrum. The conundrum was what to do about the Trumpites next door, because it turns out that the person's neighbor had a Trump sign in their yard. Now think about this for a second. Instead of apprehending the world as she understood it, seeing what was done by these people, she would rather believe the theory about Trumpites and the mythos that has grown up about the Trumpites rather than her actual experience. this is what the theory tells you to do. Distrust your own experience. At the same time, they're telling you to believe the, quote, lived experience of certain oppressed peoples, not all oppressed, certain ethnicities who are oppressed, why we should ignore the lived experiences of other ethnicities. So it becomes a kind of a cherry picking kind of thing.
Are you familiar with the concept of the magical Negro?
Yes, I am. Yes.
I think Spike Lee came up with the term.
Yeah.
And the concept is that in the movies, there's basically probably a homeless guy with a paper bag bottle of booze or whatever. He's down on so forth on his luck and whatnot, but he will be the guide. He's basically God sitting there, and he's the magical Negro because he will give a moral bearing to the
right.
But this is goes to like this concept that your color, your external color is going to determine your thoughts and your moods. You mentioned Thomas Sowell, who's a total idol of mine. His White Liberals and Black Rednecks book was just incredible. I mean, they're all series of essays, but incredible, enlightening book, and a little bit on this topic. But he himself, because his ideas don't align with whatever is determined by BLM to be blackness, he's an Uncle Tom. Clarence Thomas is, even with his last name, is an Uncle Tom. And ignoring the fact, mind you, Uncle Tom, somebody actually did a little exegesis of Uncle Tom on Twitter recently, and like, he's black guys. Like, Uncle Tom in Harriet Beecher Stowe is actually quite the guy. I'm very proud to be an Uncle Tom, but leaving that aside, there's kind of like this odd application for all these people who are, supposedly not racist, that everything's racial.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you would mention the magical Negro, that Whoopi Goldberg was one in her film, in the film called Ghost with Patrick Swayze, where she had magical powers that enabled Patrick Swayze to dance with his fiancée, Uncle Remus from the Song of the South, which was one of them had special powers. And so there's also the movie called Dazzled with Brendan Fraser and Elizabeth, I can't remember her last name, but it was a story about the devil where the magical Negro was God, and was playing chess against, I can't think of her name, Elizabeth Hurley. And so he came in and was this magical figure as well. So that's a kind of a typecast type of thing. I was mentioning the problem with critical theory, which provides this vehicle that enables certain people to believe they have hidden knowledge, that they have access, and the only thing left to do is to convince you and me that they are correct and to bring you and me to critical consciousness. That's basically a reworking of Marx's old idea of class consciousness. Well, here's the interesting thing about critical theory, which was the centerpiece of the Frankfurt School. That was a contrivance. They did not mean for this to become the new god of the left. When they being the critical theorists, the Frankfurt School came to the United States and were first at Columbia. I think they were at San Francisco for a little while as well. When they were
weren't they the new school near NYU?
Yeah. When they were here, they said, "Look, we must not use the M word," meaning Marx. In fact, this is explicit. Stephen James Bronner, I think, at Rutgers, told me this is an email. He's a scholar of the critical theorists, and he put it in his own book, very simple guide to critical theory. They didn't want to use the M word. They didn't want to scare people. This is a time when Marxism was falling out of favor. We see the beginning of the Cold War. Soviets are no longer our allies. So, we can't use Marx. We have to come up with something else. And so they came up with, let's call it critical theory. And hey, it was fantastic. It was unaltered. It was really neo-Marxism, trying to bring Marxism up to date for a new generation. And in the literature, or the exchange of letters between Walter Benjamin, who's an idol of the left, who committed suicide on the Swiss border, fleeing the Nazis, and his writings have become avant-garde with the left. Walter Benjamin's correspondence with a Philadelphia rabbi by the name of Gershon Scholem, very famous at the time. In that correspondence, and I've read this, I have this, I cite this in my next book, he said, Gershon, well, Gerson's saying to Walter Benjamin, I understand, as you have told me, that we shouldn't speak of Marx in these terms. We need to stay away from that. He's actually saying this. We can't utilize the terms that really describe what it is we're doing. We have to use these proxy terms, the fig leaf, and we have to use the terms like critical theory. We have to talk about interrogating the situation. We have to talk about transgressing boundaries. So they created this entirely new vernacular to describe this project of theirs, which is really an old project. And man, does it give graduate students today a real intoxicated feeling. It's like, it's like taking a reefer or something. They just get high on this stuff. I'm not kidding you. When I was a graduate student at Duke University a number of years ago, and I was in political science. Let's just say I was the only one of a conservative bent. I was conservative then as well. These folks were just going just crazy. Oh, this is wonderful stuff. We're talking about Georges Lukács. We're talking about the aforementioned Gramsci. And here we got the neo-Marxists of the Frankfurt School. We've got Erich Fromm. We've got Herbert Marcuse. We've got Jürgen Habermas. And we're talking about transgressing boundaries. We're talking about, hey, we can really say alienation too, the old Marxist term. And we can talk about critical theory, applying a critical lens. That's another thing right there they like to use. An anti-racist lens, a critical lens. And what they're saying, you can translate this yourself. What they're actually saying when they say this is that we're applying our own confirmation bias to the reality. When I apply a critical lens to the situation that we're faced with, that means I'm going to filter out all of the discordant, all of this, the disconfirmatory evidence, and only reveal that which confirms the original intent. This is how they do research, by the way. They begin with the conclusion, they let the conclusion become their premise, and then they load it up in between with what are called, confirmatory methodologies that they have invented. Has nothing to do with scientific investigation. Those confirmatory ideologies can be something as simple as storytelling or counter narratives, a la Derek Bell, the late law professor at Harvard University. Or it can be something as mystical and mystifying as critical discourse analysis, which means we're going to tape record what's being said and we're going to code the data. Whenever you see someone or hear someone say we're going to code the data, you're in the presence of high balderdash. But it sounds good. It sounds, it's not just data. It's not just collections of anecdotes. This is data that has been coded. And all we're doing is we're simply taking the premise and the conclusion, which we assumed at the beginning, and we're going to put something in the middle here that sounds like we're doing something important. I will tell you, and I've read far too many of these articles, particularly by the I would call him the avatar of microaggressions, Gerald Wing Sue, who is at Teachers College, Columbia University. He exemplifies the fake scholarship, where his articles are always, and I mean always, grounded in interviews or focus groups with no more than 10 to 15 people. Now, how does he recruit those people for his? He sends out an email and he says, if you have been, I've seen the emails, if you have been the victim of microaggressions, there might be a place for you in my study. And then he gets about 15 people.
It's cherry picking. It's actually, in this case, it's sour cherry picking.
Yeah. And he's letting someone else do the picking here. If you self-identify as someone, it's not a random sample that people might assume from a legitimate social scientist. I say that with trepidation. There's legitimate social science. No, he allows everyone to.
It's even worse than that. I mean, even the science part of social science. There's certain words like social justice, social science, which I think are internally, they're oxymorons in a sense. But carry on.
Yeah, no, social justice. That's another a bone to pick right there.
I just don't think you can have social justice. No. If I steal your Maserati tomorrow, or I don't know, or I throw paint at your house, it is what it is. And then it's like, well, I missed meals when I was a kid. I was bullied, whatever. It's like, okay, well, you threw paint at this house. Okay, fine.
And that's the explanation as to why you threw the paint. That's what's more important than the actual. You're a criminal throwing paint at a house. They like to talk about I think Thomas Sowell has highlighted this. They like to talk about root causes. And they want to attend to the root cause of why you threw the paint at the house, as opposed to the fact that you threw paint at the house, destroyed some property, and need to be punished for that.
Yeah, I think it's also a deflection process. I mean, all this. I'm going to pop in an anecdote. When I was in medical school, there was a clerkship that I took. It was in a particular area that I wanted to, it was my focus, and I got not an A. I had gotten an A on every single test, and I had done all my work, blah blah blah. I did a little thesis thing. Everything was A work, and I went to see the preceptor or whatever. And he said, "Oh well, out of like 25 people, I only like to give 1 A." And this other guy was better than you. And I'm like, I don't dispute. He's a really good student, really smart guy. I don't dispute that. But everything I had was an A work. It's like averages out to an A. And so he said, "Well, you seem really upset about this." He was actually a psychiatrist. He said, "You seem really upset about this. What's been going on in your life?" And I made the mistake of my father had just passed away. Yeah. This was a huge upheaval in my life. I was 23 years old. And let's see, did I get the age right? Thereabouts. Anyway, it was just so I started like weeping about that and talking about, how this, and anyway, like 25 half hour later, I'm walking out of there like wait a minute, what just happened there? Like I went in to talk about, I had a data analytic approach. I showed him my tests. I brought in all the stuff and my work and my recommendations from the people, and I wound up weeping about my dad, which was all well and good, but that's not why I went to see the guy. It was not for therapy. Yeah. And I just like hoodwinked and diverted, and I don't think I went back, and I let it stand there, and my life went on. But it seems like a lot of these things are diversions from dealing with actual situations. It's all kind of a way where they can have their own world. It's not quite the same thing, but it becomes a new standard by which tall people are short people are tall. Whatever it happens to be that you are is the admirable quality. It's just like reworking. I watch sports and let's say football or basketball, whatever. If all of a sudden it wasn't a matter of getting the ball in the basket. It was what color sneakers you had. It's a different game. You can make that game, but it's just a different one. It's not what they were all organized for.
I think that you bring a point. I'm going to go back to your notion you brought up, social justice. Thomas Sowell, in his latest book, Social Justice Fallacies, treats this in a very fine manner. Social justice, there really is no such. It has become an umbrella term for virtually anything that the left wants to do. And they, I've seen students stand up in my classes at times, not recently, but, the default is what you want to do with your life is, well, I want to work for social justice. And you can fit virtually anything into that. It's anything you want to do that's of a social, of a left-wing nature. You put it as I think of Henry Hazlitt. So you put a fat man next to a thin man, and the social justice evaluation is the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin man. And that's the assumption. That's the theory. I have a theory that people are oppressed, and obviously the thin man was oppressed, and he was oppressed by the fat man. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take something from that fat man and give it to the skinny man, irrespective of the reality behind that. And
actually, what you're saying is getting me a little bit angry, because I think you're quite intelligent and accurate, and that must mean that I'm not smart enough. So how did you get my intelligence?
Well, if you look at the definitions of social justice today, and you'll find one again in this book right here, in all of its editions, the idea, they like to use the term an equitable distribution of resources. That's how they have put this. They turned this whole collectivist notion of, we're basically going to redistribute wealth, right. Irrespective of who earned it. It doesn't matter. We're going to take something from that fat guy and give it to the skinny guy. Probably some food, probably some income, and that's the fundamental. That's the fundamental driving.
I always see this as Marxism as a kind of a politics of envy.
Well, it is.
I'm not an expert in this. I had on Jonathan Leaf recently. He's an author and intellectual, and he's writing a book on kind of the philosophers. He's got a series on Substack and whatnot. It's spelled leaf, just like a tree leaf. So we talked about this, but prior to that, I'd done some research on Karl Marx, and his grandfather was, I think, chief rabbi of, I'm not sure which German town, and his dad had trouble making headway in his profession. He was doing some kind of business or whatever, and so he converted to Lutheranism because he wanted to shed the Jewish kind of stigma and so forth. So he left Judaism, and everyone thinks Karl Marx is Jewish, but he was baptized and whatnot. But I think somewhere in the Marx child household with his dad, I think there was this kind of like, oh my God, they got us. We have to get back, and we have to kind of make. And I'm not saying there wasn't injustice in this case. I mean, it was, say 60 years before the Nazis, whatever. But there's kind of like this thing to get something back. In his own letter to Engels talks about, I think, the death of his wife or a close family member, whatever, death of, I can't remember. And Marx says, my dear Friedrich, it's sad what happened, but I know you would feel better if you sent me some money.
Yes. Is that the letter? I've seen that letter. It's amazing. It says, "Oh, I feel so bad. The death of your wife is a terrible time for you. Please send money." That's the whole letter.
So it becomes a kind of a pseudo religion where you're doing these indulgences, and you're creating penance by giving your stuff away. But it doesn't necessarily filter down to that poor person. And the whole concept of give a man a fish, eats for a day. You're giving the man a fish for a day. We see this in various aspects of our kind of medical / social world. Right now we give narcotic addicts methadone. We give narcotic addicts buprenorphine, which rhymes with morphine, Suboxone. And the idea is we're going to give them that thing. They are low, and so we're going to give them the charity of the drug they were looking for. We're not going to get them, to learn a trade. We're not going to get them to learn from how to deal with their own immaturities and their own indulgences in the other sense of the word. But this kind of pervades a lot of our thinking, where we don't really kind of have the paternal aspect of the dad saying, you know what, you need to climb this fence. I can't climb the fence for you. I think we have a kind of a maternal, a motherly aspect. I mean, I think you see this on the political front. The way left and right. This far more, I think, the kind of this. I've seen this term awful, AWFL. I forget what it stands for, but it's basically the white female liberals, awful, whatever. And we see kind of on the much more of this Marxian tendency amongst women than men. I think I don't want to go too far down this road. Maybe look for some adjudication, but I think part of the change in the university is we have only pretty much women presidents of the university. At the Ivy League and / MIT hearings by Elise Stefanik, we had I think what her name was McGill, and we had Claudine Gay. You name it. Yale just went from Salovey to McGuire, and there's this concept, and at Columbia as well. Where everything kind of has to be, everything's okay, and everyone kind of has to get along. It doesn't matter whether the theories are diametrically opposed from the truth. And I'm wondering whether we might segue to certain aspects in the news. The Gaza, free Palestine hearings. I would like to free Palestine, but from Hamas. And the way these things are kind of literally manifestations. I mean, in the riot sense, and manifestations of the edicts, dictates, and so forth at the school, and maybe go one step backwards about how kind of this education apparatus used the BLM, anti-racist Kendi aspect to get so ensconced, and what is the result? What's the product we're getting out of these universities? And what is it? Are we bearing the fruit of neglect of these underlying concepts you mentioned?
Well, there's a direct line from what's happening on the universities to what's happening in society today. It's not difficult to trace this. Going back to the summer of 2020 with the rise of BLM and the racial reckoning, and DEI folks saw the window of opportunity and basically just I can't fault them. They jumped through that window of opportunity and established this bureaucracy nationwide on various college campuses, doing the woe is me, basically manufacturing racism on the college campuses, because as Harvard's Randall Kennedy wrote an article that campuses are the least racist places in America. They are, and yet we find this penance, this hand wringing, this woe is me, that we have to make up for something, and you have to really search on college campuses to find any actual vestiges of race. So what you have to do is make it up, and you make it up by calling these microaggressions, which is basically any approved minority who says, someone was looking at me funny, someone did not, and I'm not making this up. Someone didn't open the door for me while they opened the door for someone else. And that's a microaggressions. And these are the things that get reported. And they're reported to this new bureaucracy. Well, one of the theories, that DEI embraces, and student affairs that I mentioned at the very beginning of our talk, is decolonization. And they're trying to supposedly decolonize the American university. And this notion of decolonization has been transferred from the university to the Middle Eastern conflict between Israel and the terrorist organization Hamas. And somehow, in this way, ahistorical though it may be, Israel is now the colonizer, the exploiter, and the Palestinians, as such as they are, invented in the 1960s, are the colonized. And this is a template that has emerged off the college campuses. It was created by the critical theory people, this notion of decolonization, the idea of stolen land. And you see manifestations of this in the land acknowledgement that you see from various schools, that, we want to acknowledge the Lenape tribe, the traditional custodians of the land, ignoring the fact, when they talk about stolen land, the stealing of land was ongoing in what's now the United States, what they call Turtle Island. That's their word for the United States. Stealing of land between tribes was going on, in murder and rape and pillage and torture for many, many years, many decades, centuries before the latest arrival of European colonists. And the fact is, the so-called indigenous folks simply lost out in a kind of Darwinian struggle. They simply weren't capable of fighting and keeping their land, just like, excuse me, they weren't capable of fighting and keeping their land from another tribe. And so it's the idea that there's some sort of agenda of decolonization. That is a theoretical contrivance and a template that we find grafted on to the Middle East situation. And you hear this terminology, this vernacular of critical theory and critical racialism being imposed on a foreign situation. And when I hear it, it just completely delegitimizes what these folks are saying. They have no clue. Clue.
Well, the irony is really massive. Arabic is spoken in Morocco, and Arabia was kind of like in, if you look, you kind of see, the Arabian Peninsula, in a small piece of that, and mind you, it's not really that habitable or hospitable to life. So we're talking about a small place near, Mecca, Riyadh, whatever.
Yeah.
Where there were Jews, mind you, at the time, and I think that they massacred them at Khaybar. I'm going to get the name wrong, but the fact that Arabic is spoken all western parts of Africa and whatnot. Was that not colonization? It's if Islam is practiced in Indonesia, did everyone volunteer for that?
Well, Japan is one of the great colonizers of all time. The Japanese Empire. Setting up the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which is what they called it, prior to World War II. You look at the Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan, and the Mongol invasions from Mongolia all the way to Austria. People don't realize that in the 1200s, the famous Battle of Modi in 1243, where the Khans defeated the Hungarian royal army. I mean, battling, Europeans on their own soil. You look at the Muslim invasion of Spain, and the regnant rule of the Muslims, the Moors, as they were called at the time, until they were finally expelled. Excuse me, in the late 1400s, so these were colonists as well. So it's all.
I think everybody is.
Yeah.
The interesting, secondary point. I've had George Gilder on a couple times, and he wrote Life After Capitalism, Life After Google. He has a series of books like that. And Life After Capitalism, hint, is still capitalism, because people organize a certain way, and it's part of the kind of human genome. But he not genome, but really society.
Yeah.
But he points out that rape and pillage and acquiring of territory, colonization, if you will, is the default position of mankind until communication, until technology. His chief example is looking at a caveman, say, and not Plato's cave, but the one before that. Looking at a caveman, he has sand, he has sunlight, he has water, he has the ocean, so forth, and yet he's going to basically kind of has to subsist by clubbing a raccoon for dinner or something like that. Who knows? We have the same sand. I'm sitting talking to you through the same airwaves that he had. I've got a piece of sand activated by silica, silicon chips activated by lightning, whatever, and we've managed to harness things. So the difference between them and we have the same 5 fingers per hand that the caveman had. We have presumably very similar brains and whatnot, but the difference is we have managed to communicate and build upon the raw elements out there, and that requires kind of this free market trading of ideas, which is inimical to the whole social project that's going on in the universities right now, where everything's being the answer to most everything is shut up, and my answer to every argument is shut up, and the process is cancellation. And then what you wind up is having to have colonization. You have to take things over again, because people have taken away the ability for people to prosper by the exchange of ideas. I think historically there's 2 kinds of ways of gaining wealth: basically getting stuff you have, and then getting somebody else's stuff, and or building on your own. Israel is kind of like the interesting case, because they don't have the oil that the Arabs have. They don't have the land. They don't have a lot of stuff. They basically have this tiny little piece of territory that was somewhat fallow until their arrival in the 20th century and whatnot. Partial arrival. Some had been there earlier, but they're able to kind of do the Gilder. He actually has I think a book called The Israel Experiment, or the Israel Test. But they were able to kind of make something from almost nothing, and the application is ingenuity. And so if you have ingenuity, you can the word is similar to engineering. You can make stuff, and you can create stuff. And this is the kind of the oddity of this project. People don't appreciate the fact that they can have universities. So many people at universities is really an excess. It's a benefit, if you will. I'm not sure it's a benefit, but it's a product of loads and loads of hard work by Rockefeller and Carnegie. The industrial age, where people all of a sudden had the ability to create the universities, have the money, the excess money, where they could do that. I spent time in East Europe before the wall went down in 1987. Where my wife and I were on bicycles back then, no kids, and the place stank. We were in Czechoslovakia, and it's not now erstwhile Czechoslovakia, Hungary, East Berlin, Yugoslavia, and the pollution was horrible. And this is the workers' paradise, and this is where a lot of these the Marxian concepts of ecology, whatever, they're all there, but they didn't have the money to do it. They didn't have the luxury that we had to care about stuff like that.
Yeah. And
it's just kind of like an oddity. They say no good deeds goes unpunished. Here we have the university, and there's not necessarily the diversity of thought that's there. I mean, I don't know if you have the answer for that, or kind of some kind of ability to get back what has been seeded. If you want to think in colonial terms, the neo-Marxists, proto-Marxists, Marxists, leftist, anarchists, toadies, followers, have taken over, have colonized the universities. How can they be decolonized, recolonized, whatever?
Well, I'll point you to quote my the story by Václav Havel in Brutal Minds, my book Brutal Minds.
President of Czechoslovakia.
Yes, the president. He was
Or
also
maybe was he just president of Czechia? I forget. One or the other.
Czechoslovakia at first. He was the first president post-Soviet.
And a poet and a playwright, I guess.
He was a dissident. He was in prison for a while. And he wrote a very famous essay called Power of the Powerless, in which he talks about the kind of Orwellian situation where the greengrocer has to put a sign in his store window, regardless of his personal preferences. And he didn't really understand what the sign means. It's like workers of the world unite. He just has a kind of understanding. If he doesn't put the sign in his window, something bad is going to happen to him. And so he puts, so he can get along. And so he can kind of muddle through another couple of days by putting this latest sign in the window. And similarly to this, people feel it's necessary to utter the types of banal cliches on campus. Oh, diversity is our strength. That's such bullshit. I'm sorry. I use that term in its academic term. It's an academic sense that Harry Frankfurt at Princeton University wrote a very famous essay called On Bull. And that's the term in which the sense in which I use it. These are nonsensical, meaningless phrases that absolutely are contradicted by reality. We found that, of course, because of the recent failed assassination attempt on a former president, that diversity is not our strength. No, competence, merit, the ability to do the job is our strength. And I'm speaking with respect to the United States Secret Service. So how can we seize the high ground, the commanding heights of education, and reestablish and restore the true university in its Enlightenment sense that we established 300 years ago when we expunged all of that superstitious nonsense of alchemy and astrology and phrenology and that type of thing, the fake sciences? We found that they have come back in, these fakes come back into the university and are now making inroads even in the STEM fields. And their watchword is they're trying to say, we're scientific too. We tell stories, we tell counter narratives. We do analysis based on lived experience, and this is valid too. We're looking at indigenous knowledges. That's their word, indigenous knowledges, which is science too. We're looking at the traditional medicine wheel. We're looking at the spirit talking stick. We're looking at those types of things as having some sort of legitimacy when they should be ushered out with a kick to the pants from the university without any kind of complimentary, exit, be well. So how can we do this? Well, I offer in Brutal Minds several solutions, and one is for parents and students. And that is to recognize when you're in a threat situation of the brainwash or thought reform, or these people who mean you ill. I tell exactly how to recognize them, how to recognize the terminology, how to recognize what's going on, because these people do not mean you well, and what to do in response to it. How to back them off by suggesting quite legitimately legal action, both within the university's structure of recompense and also outside the university if the behavior persists, because abuse of students, misuse of power is prevalent on the university campuses. Most people who are affected by it aren't even aware of it, that this is what's happening, because, well, these are, especially freshmen. Oh, wow, these people mean me well. They want me to make myself vulnerable. They're smiling. They're offering me free hot pizza. It's karaoke night, and the sound system is turned up, and I can be myself. And without realizing that this is all a setup by student affairs to get you into this trusting mode so that then they can begin to mold you and transform you. And I will say that one of the organizations that's off campus, that is like a professional organization of student affairs people, and they run institutes off campus to train people how to inflict the brainwash. Their motto is transforming higher education. Transforming higher education. Now, this is not a group of faculty. This is a group of student affairs ancillary support staff, clerks, enrollment managers, human lactation experts, things like that. And they're going to transform the university. Who are these people? And that's a question that I think is relevant and should be answered. And I can answer those questions, and I have answered those questions to a great degree in Brutal Minds. And I encourage people to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and to my website, where I write on these issues almost on a weekly basis. And I would say I'm working on my next book that incorporates an awful lot of what we talked about today, Randy.
Well, I appreciate it. I've come away enlightened, both from you and your little avatar, your book. I think you bring up some great points. I mean, a lot of these things, Orwellian's become an adjective, but I commend people to go back and look at his book. Eric Blair was a socialist and wrote under the pseudonym George Orwell. I don't know if he knew what. I mean, I guess he was partially disillusioned socialist. It's an interesting story right there. But his words and terms, I think are taken, maybe almost as a user's manual for the Alinsky left, and they should certainly be cautionary for us. And your book can fall under that same way as a how-to manual for people to get out. There's some I've had on my show previously, Dr. Stanley Goldfarb.
He's great. He's great.
An organization, Do No Harm. And before we leave, I don't want to misuse your time or your schedule, so you can tell me whether you can touch on this. But medicine. Herb Stein, the father of Ben Stein, and he was a Nixon era economic advisor. He said that which cannot continue doesn't. It's pretty terse. But I like that phrase. It's kind of like a Belichickian, it is what it is kind of thing. These kids, there's a quick joke. What's the most popular postgraduate question an engineering major gets? It's like, could you please tell me the specifications of this model? What computer scientist? Could you please code this for me? Gender studies. Would you put some, cream in my macchiato? So.
Fries with that kind of.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I kind of barista modified the joke.
Yeah.
But can this continue? They're in this kind of hothouse environment where exotic plants can grow, but at some point they have to leave. At some point they have to leave the nurturing teat of the university and the kind of the Ivy Palace. And they have to go do something. So are they failing, downwards? And
I will tell you that Duke Medical School, Dr. Stanley Goldfarb is fantastic. He wrote on the issues at University of Pennsylvania. I saw a very fine article by him on that. At Duke University, recently revealed, that certainly by the head honcho of the medical school, that they actually said that we want to rid ourselves of what they called white supremacy behaviors. And the white supremacy
showing up on time, right?
Showing up on time, punctuality.
I was actually kind of disappointed that you were on my green room like 3 minutes early. I knew this was going to be a horrible experience for me once I saw that you were not only on time but slightly early.
Punctuality. I mean, they're setting people up for failure who believe that. Certainly neurosurgeons who better be on time for the operating table. But
so the Herb Stein thing, at some point, there's a guy, late Jay Severin, who was a kind of a shock jock talk radio guy, interesting man. And he was in New York and Boston at various times. He got fired from a few different stations. He said things that were not always politically correct, almost obviously. But he had his black ophthalmologist example. You have one eye left. For whatever reason, that eye's got a problem, and retinopathy. And you're going to go see. You go to Mass Eye and Ear, and the black ophthalmologist shows up, and he's going to do your surgery, and he's the guy. I mean, you at any, and this is he said this like 30 years ago, but you're going to have some questions if you're honest, black or white. You're going to have some questions. Is this the best guy? Is he at Mass Eye and Ear because he was the best surgeon? Or is there some other reason? And are you willing to gamble with your eye? We saw Donald Trump effectively gambling with his life to have Melissa McCarthy there, test out, cosplaying a Secret Service agent. And we have Ms. aptly named Cheadle running the place. you know, with one of her stated goals to have more women on the staff, 30% women. And you know, if you have a 6'3" president, you know, is that doing the job if you can't physically guard him? Ronald Reagan, when he was shot, you didn't see him. He was absorbed into the massive bodies, you know, seconds later. You know, this is not a good look. And at the RNC, you saw his own, I assume, his modified, newer detail, and I assume he's going private. I have this kind of mantra, you know, private versus public. Would you rather go to a public pool or private pool? Would you rather take public transportation, private transportation? Would you rather have public security or private security? And I think, you know, Mr. Trump, you know, live and learn. Unfortunately, it wasn't die and learn.
Well, you know, the as a kind of a coda on that whole white supremacy, on time individualism is a problem. People, you know, it's always good to say, well, where did this come from? It's being taught here, but where did they get this? And I know where they got it from. They got it from a woman by the name of Tema Okun. That's T-E-M-A, Okun, O-K-U-N, who created a list of white supremacy behaviors, which is a list that has floated around and been in currency for the last 25 years. And she actually has a website, and this list comes from something called Dismantling Racism. In I think it was 1997 or 98, she was a diversity consultant, and she says that she came home and in a fit of frustration wrote down all of the things that she disliked about the people that she had to coach. And this list of behaviors became a list of white supremacy behaviors. And she acknowledges that she made it up in one night. There's no research behind this. There's no substantial body of knowledge behind this. She made it up. And this fits perfectly with the whole fraud of DEI and diversity research, where they're making stuff up. They believe in the power of storytelling, counter stories, fable, fantasy, and fake confirmation bias types of, there she is. That's her. She made it up. And she says she made it up. It became part of her dissertation. I've read her dissertation. I have it. And she says, there is mythical. She made it up. And the next thing we know, we find that it's now being cited, or this list being cited by the dean or the Duke of the Duke Medical School as being somehow authoritative. Now, I will say that Tema Okun, for a short period of time, was even employed at Duke University. And so this might be kind of like the source of this medical professionals referencing it. And all of this stuff that you're putting on here is all of a piece. This is stuff that I've researched, I've downloaded, and has a nice, and I've looked at Tema Okun, who went to Oberlin, who then graduated, got a master's at NC State, and finally got her PhD from UNC Greensboro. And of course, these diversity types of study. And in her dissertation, she actually uses this list of white supremacy behaviors that she made up. They made it up. And this is the authoritative source of that list, which I should say, by the way, in 2020 appeared in the American University of African American History. And because of, which is a Smithsonian offshoot, and was basically taken down when it was revealed that, you know, this is probably not true, not a good idea. It's a list of things that you probably ought to do, irrespective of race, creed, or color, to succeed in a modern information society. If you decide to be, not on time, not punctual, you will end up, as we in many Middle Eastern societies believe that the punctuality is not something that they need to adhere to, adhering to a schedule, and they call this polychronic behavior. In our society, we're monochronic. We adhere to a schedule. In Switzerland and in Germany, they're monochronic to an obsessive degree, especially Switzerland, where the watch or the clock is the national symbol. Other countries that are less successful, and you can look at them, they're polychronic. They think it's okay to not be on time. So what can you say to that, except look at the reality of the situation and move away from what your theories tell you? Yeah.
Well, there are obviously winners and losers, and we'll see which societies and ideas wind up quote unquote conquering, hopefully in the figurative sense. and potentially in the literal sense. I mean, I think wars are won on certain aspects of this. Again, getting back to Israel, 1947, 48, the 48 war, they were invaded by, armies of existing countries. And somehow they came out on top, and ditto along the way. And it comes down to, kind of having the George Gilder, aspect of getting better things from your environment and figuring out how to use your best tools. It's not to say that is going to last forever. I don't think Hamas are fools. I don't think they're idiots. They were clever in their own way and were under their own constraints. But as far as making people happy in the longer run, it's interesting. We don't have time today to talk about kind of this Islamunism, which is a little phrase I saw recently. It takes the sickle, the crescent, and puts it as part of the sickle for the hammer and sickle. And there's, and this concept that, the communists want Islam and so forth. It's a very one of these strange bedfellows type thing. And obviously it's not going to really last when one conquers the other internally as well. Anyway, so any final words for us for today?
Well, no, I just take heart that the great wheel of history is turning, and we find the aircraft carrier. It takes a long time to turn an aircraft carrier, and we're turning that around. The aircraft carrier, of course, being higher education. We're beginning to recognize who the enemies are, recognize the ideologies, the noxious ideologies that motivate them. And the most important thing is for parents and students to arm themselves with the information, the knowledge that they can act right now to ensure that their kids get the education that they're paying for, that parents are paying for as well. In the meantime, we can work for that long-term solution. What's going on in Florida is absolutely fabulous. What's going on in Iowa and Texas and Virginia, where higher education is returning to its roots. I would say progress, logic, reason, scientific method, and the best that has been thought and said, to paraphrase Matthew Arnold.
Well, I have an interesting rebuttal to you. Shut up.
I rarely hear that they'd like to be able to say that to my face, but
I was saying it in jest.
I'm sure, I know.
So here's Brutal Minds. People can appreciate the man, buy the book. I find it fascinating. I obviously had screen captures and have been sifting through the book a little bit while you spoke. We left out certain parts of it. You'll find my Twitter feed. But again, the easiest thing is to buy it yourself, read it yourself. We left out, kind of the instruction manual part, but I think it's a fascinating thing. I think that the real moment, I guess, for me was kind of this kind of installation of DEI as the administrative aspect. I was mentioning earlier in the green room that I just had to do my up for my medical license, and I had to take a course in implicit bias. I'm not sure there's science there. We can, I don't know if we're going to, maybe that would be another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that. And what else? If people want to help support my podcast, they can buy my book. It's not the same topic, Overturning Zika, the pandemic that never was. But I do think there are actual aspects that coincide with some of the theses you mentioned. They can buy this on Amazon and leave a review. Be awesome. Zika microcephaly was a big deal. It was the biggest pandemic to date in the world, 2016. People forget, but it was the Rio Olympics and people couldn't travel here and there in the tropics and whatnot. And it's big upheaval, but nobody's retracted the fact, the theory, which, Zika is a real, but it's a harmless dengue virus. And microcephaly is a real but rare phenomenon for babies. But one doesn't cause the other. And we have, pretty much 8 years of knowledge. And I'm the only one, I'm the little child in the emperor's new clothes, pointing out that the emperor doesn't have any clothes, and the establishment, the educational ballast, the bureaucracy, the fund, research receivers are loath to point out that they don't deserve any more Zika microcephaly grants, and they're, so it's just kind of an odd anomaly. So till we get at the spigot of this, it's going to kind of continue as a concept, but there are some ramifications because there's a Zika vaccine around the corner. WHO is undoubtedly going to mandate it or have it produced, and then it'll be a fixture. Anyway, but certain aspects, like you're talking about selection bias. Just one tiny little point. When they were investigating it, long story about, there was a discovery of Zika, supposedly there were more cases of microcephaly, 15 babies, when ordinarily there's 7 in a city the size of Recife in northeast Brazil. And the chief researcher got the names of the microcephalic babies' moms, 32 of them, reached 29 of them, and a certain number, like 24 or whatever, he asked them, did you have fever, rash, or chills during pregnancy? And if they said yes, he said, oh, it was Zika. And he leaked that to the press, and that became the whole essence of the Zika microcephaly panic. It wasn't really a pandemic. You take certain words out of pandemic, you come up with panic, and that's what happened. And nobody's been able to rescind it. So it's an oddity for me. And the last story is I brought this in front of JAMA, and they wanted to publish it. I was on a Zoom call with the erstwhile 2 chief editors, medical editors, Doctors Livingston and Bouchner, in early 2020. I'm not going to get into the essence of the call. They wound up not publishing it because they didn't want to sow any doubt on the public health establishment with coronavirus coming around the corner in early 2020. But the oddity is that both of them had to resign, fall on their swords, because Dr. Livingston said he's a surgeon. He just says, I treat the insides of people. I don't see skin. It's a gallbladder. That's what I'm looking for, whatever he's surgerizing, so forth. And then he had to, and Boucher defended him. They both had to resign, and they've been replaced by presumably, critical theory friendly prototypes instead. So this has been the subversion of our institutions. And do you trust the articles coming out when such things, non-science is really lauded and protected and so forth. So it's a real crisis in our institutions. And good luck to people needing surgery 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Yeah, I agree. And if you've noticed, I think that I'm drinking my coffee of what looks like a Mao mug, Mao Zedong. And indeed I am. I purchased this in Beijing, and I like to think of every morning, Chairman Mao serves me good coffee.
I'd love to have you back on again. I'm honored that you came on, and I appreciate your time. If you come on again, I'll double your stipend from today.
I appreciate that. That's going to be very generous of you.
Thank you.